Hi, I'm Adam Shiva, and in this video I'm going to talk about study and the process of unpacking an area where you're curious and have some passion about it and really going into a subject, unpacking the different areas of it and getting the subject as a whole without drinking the Kool-Aid from one particular school of thought or having to follow a master to guide you through the process. I've gotten really into this because I've done it so many times, from nutrition to relational psychology to recently building science and architecture. By unpacking a bunch of different systems, I've kind of started to see an overarching way to do this that can make your time be really effective. One of the core things that I would let you know really early is to watch out for repeating to yourself the same information over and over again. If you already watched 2 YouTube videos by a certain person and they're not saying anything new in the 3rd video, you're just hearing the same concepts in a different order, stop watching that and focus on something where you're going to get new information to stimulate new thoughts. There's a process where you're just trying to immerse yourself in the subject later on to keep your thoughts around it. It can be valuable then, but particularly as you're trying to unpack the area, don't get distracted by that. Also, I'd really suggest that you have a dedicated notebook, both so that you can, at the top of that notebook, I do it as a notes app within my phone, but at the top, I keep an area where I am listing new things that I want to go into. Maybe a book I heard about, maybe a particular keyword that I want to understand more. And I start just taking notes on everything that I'm learning, because as you get a couple months into a process of studying something, things that maybe were great revelations and you really got it earlier on, maybe the same thing, it's just you're not remembering that much of it. And you could spend a lot less time reviewing some simple and well-taken notes than cracking that book back open and seeing what you get out of it on a second read, which can take a lot of time to be rereading books, when your notes might give you just as much value. So early in a process, I think the goal is to understand what the prerequisites to understand the subject are. If you're going to get into the structural engineering for houses, you got to understand enough physics that that's going to go relatively smoothly for you. And maybe you should just start with unpacking the basics of physics. Or when you get into psychology, it's helpful to read Freud early on just to get what other people are setting themselves up on. And that kind of historical way of unpacking it can be really valuable because of the depth and the way that it establishes that knowledge. Even if it might not be that relevant to the current viewpoints you see, it really allows you to discuss and debate the subject and understand it within that subject's own context. So, I think that early on it's really helpful to start with YouTube and then move towards getting books at the library. I think everyone should have a library card, and it's one of the best parts of being in America is that often you can get the book you want at the library. It's particularly valuable in the part of the study where you are just trying to get a broad viewpoint of the history of a thing and collect all the basics, because if books are older or if they were very common and very popular for some period of time, they're really easy to get at the library. So also early on, it's helpful to start unpacking what that whole subject involves. So you can look for kind of broad surveys of the subject on people's blogs. Start listening to podcasts on the subject where they might do a lot of book reviews so that you can really hear a little bit about a lot of different things that have been said on that subject and see which ones you really want to dive into. Also, it can be super helpful to just go to a bookstore like Barnes & Noble. I often go there because as you look through the shelf, many of the top 20 authors and their biggest books are all definitely going to be on that shelf. And sometimes you can just tell who the figureheads in a subject are by the depth of the stack of that book they wanted to have on stock. As you start unpacking those things, you're going to start laying out a survey of all the essentials of those things. So you get into relational psychology and you hear John Gottman over and over again. And then you see, oh, when they were taught in a course, Here were the things, the co-presenters with him. When someone was doing a book review of them, here's these other people that they were doing a book review. That allows you to unpack a survey of the subject. And initially you're just collecting names. Often the library will let you select things from all over the state and get them sent. And then you come home with your big stack of books and you slowly start mowing through them. Being aware that if you are reading a thing and you're not getting anything from it, there are two great possibilities. One of them is that there just isn't that much useful information in that book for you. It might not be relevant to you. It doesn't fit your belief systems. The other one that has been super common for me is I wasn't ready for that information just yet. So I just push that one aside for a little bit, try to come back to it. After you've done that wide layout of the essentials, you should start looking for outliers. There were some great minds over the course of history that looked at things really differently. If you could get original manuscripts of Tesla while you were trying to understand alternative energy, you should. Those don't exist. But, for instance, the Bates method makes optometry totally different. The way that the work of Weston A. Price changes the way you look at nutrition is mind-blowing. Looking for those great outliers, someone who found a little piece of information that totally changes the field, is what happens the step after taking that broad survey. That step's a little harder, but it's kind of just this search around the internet thing, and you're just looking for someone who had a brilliant idea. If you can find their core work, it'll let you understand that brilliant idea a lot deeper than most. Next, you want to start synthesizing and compressing all that information together into something that was really whole. They say that Faraday, that made a bunch of steps in electromagnetics, one of the first things he did when he was still kind of young was to listen to all the scientific lecturers that were going around at the time and made one of the first science books by taking all their notes and compiling them. That is this thing that both allows you to share something from all that you've collected, a great value to the people in your life, your community, maybe a zine that was really valuable, but also it allows you to start putting those ideas together and see how they agree and disagree. Also, it can be really helpful at this point to be saturating yourself in the subject. For me, just listening to podcasts on the subject, I'll hear a book and say, oh, maybe I really should check that out, even if it was just passingly mentioned. I found game changers for me that came from a subject like that. At this point, you should start talking about it with other people who are passionate about it, that were already immersed in that subject, and start trying to teach it to people who have at least a moderate interest. Teaching something to someone who doesn't care is a waste of your time and just inconsiderate. But if you find someone who is kind of interested in that, it can be really helpful. But I think it's important to wait to teach till you've got a broad survey. To start telling your family what's healthy when you're only a couple steps in might just give them more confusion. Also, it can really break your trust if you start collecting those outliers later and they realize that what you were saying before was misleading them. They'll assume that what you're saying now is misleading them again. Now's the time to really dive into the practice of the process. That might just be getting the technique of woodworking, or just playing guitar. You got the theory, but you're starting to do it. Or, if it's relational psychology, putting your time into talking to people and trying to solve their problems. That part is really just this slow process of mastery. They say that practice makes perfect. Often it's refined to say that perfect practice makes perfect, meaning that you want to make sure that your technique is really there, and that the way that you're investing your energy, that you've carefully considered how that goes. A great example that I love has to do with guitar. If you learn a lot of guitar theory, you might know just the notes to play, but there's also a certain knowledge of the hands. The way this is often simplified is you push no harder than you have to, and you move around with the least amount of tension in your hand. Well, if you practice a lot, but you haven't made that one shift, you actually might make things harder to have endurance to play for a long time or play more complex things because you had a bad technique from the beginning. Make sure with whatever you're practicing that you get into that proper practice and the really good technique through regular reflection on what you're doing, and through, checking if you're getting hung up on something, what is the area? And be willing to go back to your notes first and reinvestigating the subject through, taking the people you trust's temperature on something as you run into snags. I hope this is really valuable for you. I love talking about this process of study. If you want to share this with someone or subscribe to my channel, both of those are really great for me. Thanks so much for being here and taking the time to dive deeper. I hope you have a great day and get your study on.